Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Lung Cancer Living Room. I'm Danielle Hicks, Chief Patient Officer here at Go-To Foundation for Lung Cancer, which just really means that I'm in charge of overseeing an amazing team of humans who help me to bring programming, education, and support services out to the lung cancer community wherever you are in the world. So we couldn't be more thrilled to have you. Tonight, we have Dr. Jared Weiss, who's going to be chatting with us a little bit about small cell lung cancer. Dr. Weiss is Professor of Medicine, Section Chief of Thoracic and Head and Neck Oncology at the University of North Carolina, and he is no stranger to the Lung Cancer Living Room. He came in last year and had a conversation with us about small cell lung cancer as well. Some of the objectives tonight are really for you guys to have a better understanding of what treatment options are available right now, but also what's coming down the pike. What are some new and exciting things happening in the research arena for lung cancer? And really a better sense of empowerment in a community, as a lot of you who are familiar with this program and having been diagnosed with non-small cell lung cancer in the past know, we really have, over the last 20 years or so, created an empowered community around the non-small cell lung cancer diagnosis. But we've really been lacking in the small cell lung cancer space. And so really one of the main objectives tonight is that empowerment, education, understanding, and support. So we could not be happier to be bringing this program to you tonight. Well, if you look over to my left, you might see a woman known to many, back by popular demand, Miss Bonnie Adario, co-founder of Go-To for Lung Cancer. So we're thrilled to have her sitting here next to and with us tonight.
I just come to eat.
She just comes to eat. But before we get started, not a lot of advancements have been made in the last 50 years necessarily in small cell lung cancer, except for the last few years, right? Where things have really started to ramp up and change. And I know we can't necessarily see it with maybe the shot that you're looking at me at right now, but there's a big sign on the wall behind me that screams hope. And it's so exciting to me to see this hopeful movement happening in the small cell lung cancer space right now. So before we start talking about some of those exciting things, can you tell me a little bit about the difference? What are the main differences between a non-small cell lung cancer and a small cell lung cancer diagnosis?
Sure. So just to answer that question, perhaps we can start at what cancer is to begin with. Every living thing, plants, animals, humans like us, are composed of microscopic building blocks called cells. And inside of every healthy cell is a set of instructions for how the cell does its job. These instructions are called DNA. And every high school biology student learns DNA makes RNA, RNA makes protein, and protein are the building blocks of the cells. Most of the effectors, the machinery of cells, are proteins. And so what cancer is a disease of mutations or mistakes in the DNA. What happens in cancer in general is that you have this healthy cell with its instructions, it's sitting put, it's doing its job. In the case of cancer cells in the lung, none of the healthy cells in the lung are really supposed to ever divide. They're supposed to do their jobs. And what happens with cancer is that you have these mistakes in the instructions of the cell that make it forget how to do its job and instead learn how to make copies of itself spread and grow, which is what cancer is. Non-small cell lung cancer are cancers of the squamous cells of the lung, which are these tough cube-shaped, easy for me to say at 8:45 at night, tough cube-shaped cells that line the airways and protect them. When you get a cancer of a squamous cell, that's a squamous cell lung cancer. And the other non-small subtype that's more common these days is adenocarcinoma, which in plainer language is just a cancer of the glandular cells that secrete mucus into the lung. In contrast to these, small cell is a cancer of a signaling cell within the lung. So you have a cell whose job it is to communicate with other parts of the body that gets these mutations and mistakes that turns it into a cancer. Now, the nature of a cancer is determined by two things. One I just explained, which is what kind of cell goes bad. The other one that until recently has been really only influential in our thinking about adenocarcinoma, but is now small cell relevant, is that how it goes bad also matters. So anyone who's been following non-small cell lung cancer knows that the biggest advance in the last 20 years is the subtyping of adenocarcinoma into the most important mutation that drove it to become cancer. So EGFR, ALK, RET, NTRK, there are half a dozen others. And these are famous these days because we have targeted therapies, right? You have one mutation, you get a drug that mucks with the works of that, you get wonderful things happening. We don't have quite that simple of a biology in small cell, but one of the most important recent advances, and it's not yet clinically applicable, but it gives massive hope for the future, is that we have come to understand the underlying biology of small cell and have realized that it's not one entity, that really we've been lumping together at least 3 or 4 entities that are not the same from each other. And what gives a lot of hope here is that the biologic themes of these cancer types are very different from each other. And they give hints, and I don't want to use a word stronger than hint or clue, but legitimate hints and clues as to the therapeutic vulnerabilities of these cancers that we might use to benefit patients. And we're still at the stage of scientific investigation of most of this. It's still really mostly what we call in silico research, meaning done on computers with existing data, but it's actually yielding fruit and things that I think over the next 10 years, I hope things are faster. I think will actually yield new insights as to which patients should get which drugs and new drugs to further that hope. And so I know we're going to talk tonight about a lot of the things that are giving hope now. We have newly approved drugs now. We have hopefully a new drug to be approved this summer. That drug is the start of a theme that I'm extremely excited about for small cell. But I think there's hope beyond just the immediate, that there are waves of advances that happen for cancers, and there is visibility to the next wave in small cell. And that's where I'm excited about the biologic advances. Not that I think they're coming to clinic tomorrow, that would be dishonest, but the hope that they will create a tidal wave of changes on a slightly longer timescale is quite real and exciting.
Yeah, I love that, and I'm excited to talk about some of these exciting things and some of the hints that you referred to and what they're showing us and what we're finding. And I know we'll have a conversation too about how they might not be readily available for everyone, but clinical trials and the importance of clinical trials and yada yada yada. But we'll get to that. Right now,
I won't jump the gun.
yeah. So right now, let's talk a little bit about right now. What is approved now, and how are we treating small cell lung cancer from a first line sort of standpoint?
So let's start with the assumption that we're talking about patients who want it, right? That after counseling, the patient is sufficiently fit, sufficiently motivated. And then if of interest to you or anyone else who asks questions, we can break that down, because obviously the real world is the real world. But for the sake of simplification and conversation about advances, let's assume that we're talking about patients who are very physically fit and whose values are oriented towards aggressive care. And then, of course, we can talk about the nuances once we start with the simple.
Yeah, and I don't want to interrupt you, but I think one very important thing to maybe touch on first of all, because I think it's really relevant and you just touched on it, is how small cell lung cancer is staged. Because the staging is a little bit different than the way we stage non-small cell lung cancer. So when we're talking,
yeah, you're reading my mind. I was about to go there. It's good. Your turn to jump the gun. So for my fellows taking the boards, it's actually staged the same way. So if you're taking a boards exam or you're pulling out the textbook, the system is identical to non-small cell, where you're supposed to describe the characteristics of the primary, the characteristics of the lymph nodes, and if it's spread distantly. And you're absolutely right. In the real world, in the clinic where we're trying to optimize care for an individual human being, everyone throws that system out because it's not functional, right? Staging systems are designed by surgeons. It's actually one of the least surgical cancers, even when we cure it. And they're designed around prognosis, right? In particular, prognosis after surgery. And they don't have dividing points. Their cut points of stage 1, 2, 3, 4 are cut points in prognosis, not in what is the right thing to do to optimize that prognosis. And that's where staging really fails us in 2 of the cancers I care deeply about, which is to say head and neck cancer and small cell lung cancer. In the case of small cell, our focus tonight, what's much more functional is to talk about limited stage and extensive stage. And it's a really simple system. If everything can be safely encompassed in a single radiation portal, it's limited stage, and you treat it with chemotherapy and radiation with a goal of cure. If you cannot, then the goals of care are instead extension of duration of life, and arguably more importantly, preservation of quality of life. And it's mostly cancer medicines that help you get there, although radiation can be productive. And the old rule that I was taught in training, I won't say how many years ago, that you can never cure extensive stage or stage 4 disease isn't 100% true, right? Most of our footnotes and caveats in oncology are unhappy ones. This is a happy footnote, which is that you do occasionally get cures in extensive stage small cell. They were rare in the pre-immunotherapy era, but that rate was never zero. The paradigm of chemorads in small cell, it's one of the only, it might be the only chemorads paradigm when actually the chemo does more towards the cure than the radiation. It was the trial way back when was chemo versus chemo plus radiation, unlike just about any other cancer where it was radiation versus chemo radiation. So we do occasionally cure with chemo alone. I've seen those with my own eyes, not as many as I wish, but it's real. And as we've entered immunotherapy, this is the joy of immunotherapy, that while we want it to be for everyone, and it is not for everyone, it's not even for the minority yet, there is such a thing as cure. And if we can't cure, at least durable control with immunotherapy. And this is where, a lot of people like to make analogies to is the glass half full or half empty. I'm a recovering New Yorker. It's who drank my water. But, keeping the New Yorker joke going, immunotherapy to me is the first slice of pizza. And I'm pizza obsessed. I grew up in New York. I've traveled through Italy. I have dreams that are nothing but the memory of the taste of pizza. By the way, most often Pepe's in a haven for anyone who's also pizza obsessed. But at any rate, if you're a pizza obsessed as I am, and you get one slice when you're hungry, you're not satisfied. In fact, you're hungrier. You want the second slice more than when you had the first one because you just learned that you have Pepe's in front of you, right? It's amazing. You want more. And that's what immunotherapy is. It is exciting in the here and now. If you're a patient, you have more hope than ever before. But for those of us who see patients over years, now decades, and follow the arc of progress, both of individual humans that we care about, but the scientific research, the clinical research, it's that first slice of pizza. The question now is, how do we make that available? How do we make that a reality for a higher percentage of patients? And of course, until we've eaten the whole pie, and I'll confess, I have eaten the whole Pepe's pie before. Last I was in New Haven because I missed it so much. Until we get to 100%, we got to keep asking, where's the next slice coming?
So when we talked a little bit about chemotherapy and radiation, so what is immunotherapy, right? Because I think there is a lot of hype out there, regardless if you're diagnosed with non-small cell or small cell, because I think they've done a great job with the direct-to-consumer sort of advertising about talk to your healthcare provider about immunotherapy. And so everybody's like, this is the next best thing since sliced bread, and I must have this as my treatment option. So talk a little bit about immunotherapy and who it might and or might not be good for.
Sure. So we talked earlier about the nature of cancer, right? We talked about DNA makes RNA, RNA makes protein, and that if your DNA is messed up, you get cancer because the machinery is mucked up and it's doing things it's not supposed to do. The other way that mutations change the cell is to change how it looks. And there are two different ways that cancer can look foreign to the immune system. One is that every healthy cell plays show and tell with the immune system. It keeps saying, look what I made, look what I made, look what I made, playing show and tell. And the reason it does this is that we have these cells called T cells or killer T cells in the immune system. These are the xenophobes of the immune system. They float around, and if they recognize that a cell is saying, hey, look, I made this, and this is something that doesn't belong. It's a viral protein. It's a cancer protein not otherwise found in the body, then the T cell kills that cell. The other way that cells can look foreign is that some of these proteins can be right on the surface of the cell, not shown by the cell consciously, but they're just sitting there. And these are different in terms of the appropriate, the ways to go after them. But starting on the T cell side, obviously anyone who has cancer, there's a failure of the immune system. Something hasn't gone ideal, right? Because that cancer hasn't been killed off by the immune system. Why is that? There are a lot of answers to that, a lot of which we probably haven't scientifically discovered yet. But one of the common ones that we have discovered is that cancer molecules can express this molecule that you could think of as an invisibility cloak for cancer cells. And that molecule happens to be called PDL1. And PDL1 makes a handshake with a molecule on the T cell that happens to be called PD1. And that makes the cancer cell essentially invisible to the T cell. The T cell leaves it alone. Why am I nerding out on the molecular immunobiology other than the fact that I happen to be a molecular immunobiology nerd, is that we have drugs that can interrupt that handshake and make the cancer cell visible to the T cell. And we have two such drugs FDA approved for the treatment of small cell lung cancer, atezolizumab and durvalumab, that can be added to the first treatment that a patient gets, typically carboplatin and etoposide, that improves survival. And this is remarkable because we have not had an improvement in survival in a very long time in frontline small cell lung cancer, in any line small cell lung cancer, but it's also remarkable because of the nature of the survival improvement. I can't recall the last time a patient came in and said, I want to live X amount of time longer. Unless X is lots of years till a kid's wedding or graduation or something, right? People don't usually come in asking me for a chance at a small improvement in the average. They come in asking about a hope of being alive at a distant time point. And that's the nature of the benefit from the immune system. The inconvenient truth is that it doesn't help the average patient. The wonder is that when it helps, it can give years or even cure.
Would it be fair to say we need to get better at understanding who it will and who it will not work for? Or we just need to get
we've
better?
started to scratch the surface of it. In non-small cell and in some other cancers, the level of PDL1 can be a marker. It doesn't work in small cell for predicting. Frankly, it doesn't work that well in anything. It's a lousy biomarker. But what has yielded a little progress are those small cell subtypes that I talked about earlier. There are subtypes that are far more immunogenic than others. But again, to come back to my earlier comments, this is more promising scientifically than it is in the moment. No patient is going to improve her or his care by asking their doctor to subtype their cancer. You can spend, some insane amount of money to do it outside of a study, and you won't do a thing with it because the immunotherapy added to chemo does add to chemo in all of the subtypes. It adds more in some than others, but we're starting to dive deeper into what is underlying the difference in what's different between the subtypes that drive it. And that's starting to yield a little more fruit. Again, very much not ready for prime time, but sure, we are getting closer to a point where we can predict in advance who's going to benefit from our existing immunotherapies. But I would say to an extent, and this is an easily criticized comment, but we're being casual here. Who cares, right? What I need as a clinician desperate to help more patients is not a laboratory test that can tell me, oh, patient A is going to benefit, patient B is not. What I need more is to say, okay, if patient B is not going to respond to this drug, what drug will their cancer respond to? What can I help that person with? And so, yes, there is some research in this area, but frankly, I'm personally much more excited about broader advances that can get there for everyone.
So before we get some into these new and exciting advances, I want to step back to sort of something you said at the beginning of the conversation around immunotherapy, and that was sort of how cancer finds its way into any organ and starts to begin with. And you said, and I don't want to misquote you, so correct me because I'm certain I'm going to get it wrong, but you said something along the lines of our immune system's inability or ineffectiveness to identify a cell, for lack of a better term, that has gone rogue, right? And does that mean that you're saying that we all have tendencies for cells to go bad every day, sort of in our life, but our immune system is smart enough to find them and eradicate them before they turn into cancer? But for some reason, on a cellular level, something slipped through our immune system.
Absolutely. And there are a lot of ways this can go awry. Cancer cells can express what we call checkpoints like PDL1, where they're fending off the T cells. You might not have a T cell that's active against whatever is foreign on the cancer cell. Cancer cells can stop presenting stuff. They can lose these HLA. They're called HLA molecules. It looks kind of on a molecular level like a chalice hanging off of the cell. And then that chalice is holding the foreign thing. And then the T cells recognize only one foreign thing in the context of a specific chalice, and that's your immune type. You could think of it like a blood type, and cancer cells can lose whatever HLA type, the chalice type that it needs to evade the immune system. And then some of the exciting foreign stuff that it would be lovely to have the T cells recognize are not presented. They're instead just on the surface of the cell, which T cells don't know how to go after without a little help. And so that's a long list. That's a tiny list of what's probably the whole of what's out there. And the whole of what is known scientifically is probably a tiny portion of the tricks that cancer cells have. To quote a very smart Japanese oncologist, Dr. Meimando, and you have to imagine this on a ASCO podium, 9 Jumbotron situation, and you have to imagine it in a really thick Japanese accent. Cancer cells are very, very, very smart. They have a lot of tricks up their sleeve.
Yeah, having talked to people who have been diagnosed with lung cancer for a better part of 20 years now, I always say that, but I always hesitate to say that cancer is smart because it feels like such a
we hate it, right?
Yeah, yeah, but it's true.
We hate it, but it is smart, right? You have to know the enemy. Don't Sun Tzu, never underestimate the enemy.
I agree.
This enemy is evil. We all hate it, but it is a smart enemy.
Yep. So we've talked about chemo, we talked about radiation, we talked about immunotherapy as it stands right now. We've talked about combinations of these therapies. I'm still going to pause one more time before we jump into what's coming down the pike and talk a little bit about palliative care, because these therapies aren't without their side effects, right? Or some challenges that may come along with, these drugs that are being helpful in killing your cancer, but they might also make you feel sick or have some adverse events for other reasons. Can we talk a little bit about palliative care, Dr. Weiss? What is your recommendation in your practice? When should people start looking into palliative care, and what does it mean? Because quite often it's confused with hospice care, and they're two very different things.
So palliative care should start the first day that the patient meets a healthcare provider. Any good thoracic oncologist does palliative care from the first moment. So what is palliative care? Palliative care is anything that improves how somebody feels. It can also refer to a service that does nothing but focus on quality of life issues. And I think having a separate service involved is a really good thing. In non-small cell lung cancer, we have data that improves quality of life, no surprise, but the bigger surprise that it actually improves survival. I'm not going to dive into the details of why that happened because I think it would be worthy of far more time than we have, but I do want to step back and talk about quality of life. Quality of life is very multifactorial, right? There are emotional factors, there are spiritual factors, interpersonal factors. Some of these are none of my business as a patient's oncologist, and certainly out of the scope of what we can do in an hour visit. And let's be honest, not all oncologists are spending an hour with the patient and can without denying care to others. So if we narrow our focus for the moment, recognizing that other things matter, but we narrow our focus to cancer-related physical quality of life, recognizing that's not everything. There are two dominant drivers, two things that hurt my patients the most. Me, and by that I mean in a slightly comic way, no one seems to be laughing. I mean the side effects of treatments. And the other one is the cancer, right? And when I think about optimizing a patient's life, patient's quality of life, I don't have the luxury of ever ignoring either of these factors. They're both a constant threat to the patient, right? We know that treatments, particularly chemotherapies, cause fatigue, they cause nausea, they cause vomiting, they cause more hair loss than I have going on here, right? And depending on the specific agent, they cause a variety of other problems. And we know, unfortunately, many of us, I'm sure too many people in the room know far too well that of the suffering that cancer causes. Small cell loves to grow in the center of the chest. There it causes pain, it clips off airways, causing shortness of breath and cough. It spreads to the brain where it causes headaches, nausea, vomiting, confusion. And so when I'm considering maneuver A versus maneuver B, or do it versus don't do it, or more aggressive versus less, or any of these axes that people think about, I'm never ignoring either, right? Quality of life would be better if the cancer never happened in the first place, which is why I wish we'd outlaw cigarettes. But given the politics of our country as they are, and we would have cancer even if we did that, you're out in California, right? I can say that. Right? Mostly friendly audience.
Yeah.
It's okay. I'm in North Carolina. I have to watch where I say most. But at any rate, there are treatments that cause a lot of side effects, but nonetheless improve quality of life compared to not doing that. And that's a critical consideration for small cell. And I drum on this not to defend chemo. I don't want to defend chemo. I'd like to bury it. But because if you want to optimize quality of life, it's a harsh reality that needs to be understood in the standard of care in 2024. So what are we going to do? If we're going to look at the suffering from the cancer, we're going to look at all of our tools to fight that. We have chemotherapy, we have immunotherapy, we have radiation, we have stents. People have fluid on their lungs, we can drain it out. And that's a very, very partial list. And then we're going to look at comorbid conditions, right? If someone has COPD that's out of control, yes, the dominant cause of their shortness of breath may be the cancer, but if I can optimize their COPD more, they're going to feel better, and I should do that too. And then we're going to look at our treatment, right? And we know we have an aggressive, awful cancer here. We don't have the luxury of observation that other cancers have. We don't have the luxury of being as gentle as we want, because even if all we cared about was quality of life, and I would argue we should care about it more than anything else, we can't let the cancer hurt people. So we're going to do things that have a risk of hurting people. We darn well better do everything in our power to reduce that harm. The obvious one that I think most people know about are antiemetics, but I will share with you that antiemetics, anti-nausea drugs, are not just one thing. There have been recent advances in anti-emesis, and it is a critical part of optimal care to be using it. So we have drugs like fosaprepitant and other NK antagonists that have made a big difference in care. We have steroids, we have 5-HT3 antagonists, most commonly known Zofran. We have the realization that olanzapine, otherwise known as Zyprexa, given for 4 days after chemo can reduce nausea. Believe it or not, that's a repurposed drug. It's an antipsychotic that, through the same mechanism in the brain, is very powerful in preventing nausea. Right? We have a bunch better anti-nausea drugs, and then the other supportive care advance that we have very recently that I think is dramatically underappreciated by providers is we now have a short-acting CDK4/6 antagonist. Its name is trilaciclib. I know I just spoke some Greek, so let me translate that. How does chemo cause harm, right? Most of the harm caused by chemo, not all of it, but most of it is caused by the way it works. Chemo kills dividing cells. Most of the cells in the body aren't bothered by this because they sit put, they do their job, they're not dividing, unlike cancer cells, which are constantly dividing. But some cells in your body do divide. And one of the most important cell types that is constantly dividing in the body, or I shouldn't say constantly, but regularly divides, are the bone marrow cells that make new blood cells. The blood cells that we all have right now are white cells that fight infection, are red cells that carry oxygen around, help us to breathe and to have energy. And the platelets that help us clot are not only not the same cells we had as babies, they're not the same cells we had a few months ago. They're constantly turning over. And so because the bone marrow progenitors have to divide to make more of these cells, they can be poisoned by the chemo. And this causes a lot of, not all, but a lot of the worst side effects of chemo, right? If you pull up the regimens we use most commonly, all of them have suppression of blood counts and things that follow from the suppression of blood counts as their most common side effects. And I would argue in listening to patients that very, very high on that list, if not the top, is fatigue. And your blood counts, particularly the red counts, anemia, is an important contributor to that. Now, for years, we had a certain learned helplessness as oncologists. We didn't have a lot we could do about it. And that has changed. We have a drug that can hold the bone marrow progenitors from dividing for a short time while the chemo is washing by to minimize the harm. The chemo is done, and then they come back into cycle and make new cells. And it's a remarkable story because it does what it's supposed to do. It numerically protects the blood counts. It protects against the adverse events related to them that we formally defined. And critically, it improves patient-reported fatigue, right? The end point that we're really getting at for quality of life. The reason why I'm going on at such length about it and have such passion is that it is the most underutilized supportive care drug in probably all of oncology, certainly in lung cancer and in small cell. I don't know if it's poor marketing or bad values or what, but it's really not used very much, and it really does make a real difference.
Yeah, I love your passion around palliative care, and you got some woot woots in the room when you gave your first,
Thanks.
your first sort of knee jerk at diagnosis. You should be or at the onset of treatment, you should start having
The molecular
conversations.
biology didn't get the roots? Come on now.
They didn't get quite the woo-woos, not with that one. I do want to get into talking about some of the exciting things, what's coming down the pike, and I'd like to start with a therapy that's been in trial for a while now that just got priority review. You alluded to it, maybe coming late spring, early summer, maybe coming to market for some folks because it's a little bit different. It's along the same lines, but it's a little bit different. So can you talk a little bit about what we might expect there?
Yeah, so I think you're referencing tarlatamab. And you may recall our earlier conversation. I said that there are two ways that the cancer cells can look foreign, right? There's the show and tell mechanism, and there's the just sitting on the surface of the cell mechanism. There are three exciting targets, in my opinion. This is heavily editorialized, but three I'm excited about more than others that seem to be there on most small cell lung cancer cells. Their names are DLL3, GD2, and SEZ6. I know it rolls right off the tongue. And what we're looking to do with this new class of targeted immunotherapies, known as BiTEs and CAR T, is that we're trying to bring the killing power of T cells to these targets that just sit on the surface of the cell. We're teaching T cells how to see them. So antibodies look like a Y. I guess that looks a lot like my chalice, but my sport coat's not letting me bring my arms closer together. And in a normal antibody, both sides are actioning the same thing, right? So if you have an antibody against, I don't know, some antigen on flu, both sides are actioning that. What this drug is one side is actioning a target on small cell lung cancer cells called DLL3. And the other side is binding something called CD3. And I'm going to put my arms down and talk about what these are. DLL3, as I said, is on the surface of small cell lung cancer cells. CD3 is present on T cells. And so what this does is bring the cancer cell and the T cell, by the way, the cancer cell is actually bigger than the T cell, together. And then once they're touching like that, that makes the T cell kill the cancer cell, right? And so it's a link that brings them together. And this is really exciting to me because this is in the class that I've kind of bet my career on, which is targeted immunotherapies, going out after specific targets on the surface of these cancer cells. The drug is a pain in the neck to give for patient and oncologist both. As of right now, the first two treatments are given inpatient, and the logistics around this, probably out of scope for the short amount of time we have left, but let's just say a pain in the neck. In my opinion, worth it, because number one, this works in a totally different way than our other chemo and immunotherapy. So when those have stopped working, this still works. Number two, exciting because it's the beginning of a story, right? It's proof of principle that we can action these targets. And most immediately, it works. The response rate is very, very high. I'll remind you that response does not mean the same thing in trials as it does in plain English. In trials, response means an at least 30% shrinkage by a unidimensional, in my opinion, messed up system called RECIST. Patients with a 29% response aren't called responders. But let me tell you, someone with a 29% shrinkage and 31% live the same, right? We just had to set the bar somewhere to compare drug A to drug B. By that measure, recognizing that the human benefit rate is much higher than the number I'm about to say, it's 41% in heavily pretreated small cell lung cancer. That is amazing. And some of that benefit can be durable. It's another shot on goal for getting that very long control. We've already seen some of the first phase 1 patients still responding at their latest follow-up. And so this is really exciting. I think there's a very high chance we get an approval for it this summer. And it's exciting in the moment. It's also exciting because it's proof of that principle. I think we're going to have more BiTEs and CAR Ts behind it. And I think this is really going to be one area where small cell is going to be taking the lead, maybe one of the lead cancers in solid tumors for bringing this kind of benefit to patients. I'll remind you that if you look at the arc of history of cancer drug development and improvements in care against cancers can leapfrog each other. What was once the worst cancer can become the best, right? So APML, a type of leukemia that was once like the most dreaded leukemia, it's friggin' easy to cure. We have, right? Like that's become like the best kind to come in. And melanoma, which used to be a rapid death sentence, now has the best immunotherapy responses, right? And I think small cell is sort of poised to do that leapfrog, to go from one of the more dreaded cancers to one that we can do a whole lot more.
Yeah, I love that, and I really appreciate the conversation about tarlatamab, and we've been watching it closely as data has been coming out, and I think you're right. We don't have near enough time to have an in-depth conversation about it, but once the approval happens, we will definitely be back to talk a little bit more because I think it's important. It's exciting. It's important. It's something new for our small cell lung cancer community that they need to understand. Because to your point, Dr. Weiss, there is an inpatient sort of aspect to this, at least as it sits right now, meaning it's not just go home or go to your clinic, get an infusion, and then go home. So there's some education and some deep understanding that needs to happen both from a healthcare professional and a patient side to that so that people really understand. But we too are excited, and as I said, as part of our commitment to the small cell lung cancer community, we promise to bring you breaking news as soon as that happens.
I
Yeah.
want to say one more thing about DLL3 and tarlatamab, which is that people don't need to wait for this to be approved. There are multiple DLL3 trials going on, right? The next generation drugs, there are a lot of exciting other bispecifics and trispecifics, and there are a number of DLL3 agents that people can get on clinical trial right now. And kudos to the company. I don't say this too often about pharmaceutical companies. Kudos to the company. They have a compassionate use protocol. So many institutions like mine are opening up a protocol that it's a study, but it has we're not studying anything, right? It's a study just to get early access to drug for patients. We expect ours open within the next week or two all across the country. Other academic centers are doing this too. And so, there's a good reason to not wait, right? Impatience is not always a bad thing. Patients cannot wait, and there is availability of tarlatamab and other DLL3 targeting agents now. Nobody needs to wait till the summer.
I think that it's a really important point because we haven't touched on clinical trials as a whole yet, or the importance of it. And before we jump into that, anybody who is interested in learning more about these DLL3 trials, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can call our helpline. We can connect you with one of our navigators who can connect you to a trial potentially close to you or in your area. But talking about clinical trials for a second, I mean, I think, I always like to, number one, first and foremost, thank current and past participants of clinical trials, because without the person enrolling in these trials, we would not be near where we are right now in so far as advancements for lung cancer or cancer as a whole or disease as a whole. So
And as quickly as this all happened. If you go back 20 years when
Yeah.
they were, had several clinical trials going on.
Yeah.
Which it took forever for something to come out of it. But now today, we're moving so much faster, which is really encouraging for patients.
I agree.
That's a great point, right? Look at tarlatamab's approval. This is not off of a massive phase 3 that was done over a decade. This was done over phase 1 expansion, essentially phase 2 work. I forget how many patients, 100 and change. And that is the new theme in oncology, that when drugs really work like this, we're not waiting years. We can't wait years for them when they're this good.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. So thank you to all of you. I know I see some of you in a room. I know some of you who are watching from home who have participated in trials or currently are. I don't think we thank you enough, so I want to say that. But what else is exciting and happening trial right now or being looked at as promising?
So as I said, this is a theme I'm excited about personally, this surface targets theme. GD2 is another related target being studied. We've invented our own CAR T against that target because it wasn't getting developed. So we did it. CAR T is a related technology where you take the T cells out of a patient's own body and you change what they target so that they can see these surface targets. I'm sure my CAR T collaborators would cringe at how much I'm oversimplifying this, but it's another way to make the T cells attack a surface level target. And what's really cool about CAR is beyond the name, right? I have all these slides with fancy cars on them. And I changed the car on the slide. I gave a virtual talk to China a few weeks ago, and I found like what's the new Chinese electric car and put a picture. Anyway, sorry. Academic docs get into our slides. But what's
That's
really
true.
cool is that when it works, the patient has a living drug in their body for the rest of their lives, right? The car is always there. So I'm really excited about it, tarlatamab and other bites, but when they work, you're stuck with an infusion every few weeks for the rest of your life, or at least as long as it works. When CAR works, you're done, right? I mean, you get that drug, and as long as it works, it's there. And if it's working but not fully suppressing cancer, right? I think an underappreciated point is that at the time that we say a drug is not good enough and we switch to another drug, that drug may be suppressing some cells or slowing growth, right? But if it's not hitting our bar for good enough, we stop because we don't want to deny the patient the benefit of something else. You have a CAR in you, even if it's not good enough and you're going to add on something else, you forever have that CAR. And that makes this technology very exciting to me. The idea of a living drug that you can get once and be done with.
Yeah, we are in the future, aren't we? We're talking about electric cars and drugs
Flying cars.
flying cars, right? And drugs or therapies that work forever. I mean, it sounds like an absolute dream, but I think it's one of the things that makes this sort of point in time so exciting. We are at sort of I don't even want to say the beginning. We're at like a what is the word I'm looking for? Not a nexus, but we're like at a we're at a crossroads, and we're really speeding to towards some of these really new and exciting things.
That's the encouraging thing, for all cancer now, not even just lung cancer. This is moving. It's all moving very quickly, not just small cell, but all of these other drugs that are in clinical trials. And clinical trials are so important. And that is so important for us to teach patients how important clinical trials are, because they kind of leave that first appointment with not so good news. They feel like they're being given something that, isn't really, meant for their cancer.
So, in your opinion, when is the right time for someone to start at least thinking about clinical trials as an option if you're a small cell lung cancer patient? When should they start thinking about it or having conversations with their healthcare provider?
Before the first drop of the first treatment. So, and this is an underappreciated point. And it's a problem because people don't tend to get involved and get educated, get on advocacy until a little bit later in their course. But it's tragic to me if I have an amazing trial for a patient, and that patient, I see this like every clinic consult where they get the first dose like the day before they see me. They come in and they're like, "Oh, I read about this trial of yours on the web. Can I get that?" And no, if I had seen you yesterday, you could have. Now you're not eligible. It makes me very, very sad. It makes the patient very frustrated because trials are defined for a narrow population of who you're trying to help. And it's not that we're only trying to help one group of patients. We're trying to help every group of patients. But trials have to make groups so that we can study things in a logical way. And so, it really needs to be considered right away. And I think sometimes people get diagnosed with cancer. This is terrible. This is obviously anxiety provoking. And people make war analogies to this, right? And there's mixed benefit and harm to that. But one thing that comes out is the desire to do something right away. I'm going to fight my cancer. And I fundamentally agree with that. You've heard me speak about the value of impatience tonight. But what I'm impatient for is time to doing the thing that works, that actually improves quality of life the most, that actually improves survival most, not time to doing something. And so that often drives getting the first cycle of standard of care drug right away. For patients who are interested in it, considering trials, and I'm choosing my words carefully, interested in considering trials, and have the means of transportation to a major academic center, I think that's what you want to do urgently. And if you have to delay care a week to do it, most major centers get people in quickly. At my place, we have a policy. Every patient with small cell is offered an appointment within 1 week of the phone call. So we're not asking people to wait months. We're saying if you want to consult with us, you're going to wait 1 to 6 days.
Yeah.
And we see people quickly because we know that you can, right? And most of our peers are doing something similar. I don't think everyone's getting a week, but people are moving pretty quickly. So to get to the good stuff, right? Because if you think about all of our new advances, they were the trials of yesterday.
Yeah.
So, if we're going to get that to patients, we need to give them the opportunity. We need to be educated about this and see us early in life.
Yeah, I'm actually going to write down all of the new advances or the trials of yesterday, because the trials of today are the new advances of tomorrow. And I get that, and I just needed to say it out loud so I don't forget it. because I think it's a very valid point, and I think we could do a whole living room on clinical trials. In fact, we are in May with Dr. Nieva from USC, but I think to drive this home, it's such an important conversation, and it's not always as readily available as it might be where you are, Dr. Weiss, or at other academic centers who are running their own trials. When we think about where patients are actually being treated in the community, setting, particularly in some more rural areas of this country, access to clinical trials is not that easy. And not so shameless plug about GoTo and some of the work that we do is for our lung match program. So anybody who might be in that position where they're not sure, A, about what a clinical trial is, or B, how to access one, we do have navigators that can help talk you through that. And again, based on your needs, your location, and where you are and are not willing to go, help you find, find your way to folks like Dr. Weiss and others who are running some of these important trials.
One other point, if I may, to just dovetail off that. I know we're limited on time, but I think we need to acknowledge that not everyone has the same resources, right? I remember when immunotherapy drugs were in phase 1, people flying in from all over the country for it, and those were not poor patients, right? Yeah. There are economic disparities in this country, and it's interesting, the demographics of small cell in the US, but not everywhere in the world, interestingly enough, does tend towards more disadvantaged patients socioeconomically. There's an and it's smoking related link. You need, in the US, but not everywhere in the world, that is associated with lower socioeconomic status. And so some patients can travel everywhere. That's great. You can travel anywhere, come to UNC. We have great trials. But not everyone can. And in this context, I want to point on the value of volunteer and advocacy organizations in helping. And I want to point out that many clinical trials are able to support that travel for patients to help make it possible. And so one should not assume, okay, I can't afford to travel every 3 weeks or whatever it is. This isn't for me. I'm not going to find out. Yeah. That would be a mistake because there are multiple avenues to assistance to try to make it broadly available. I'm not going to pretend we've reached equity. We have not reached equity. We have a lot of work to do. But still, on an individual patient basis, please don't count yourself out. There are sometimes avenues to make it work.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that. What would be some non-clinical advice you might give someone outside of what we've already talked about, but maybe summarize, because I think you've given a ton tonight, someone diagnosed with small cell lung cancer? Any psychosocial, stuff they might need, any support, any education services, that type of thing?
Well, that is their treatment, right? It's just not the drugs, which we spent most of the time talking about. I think you and I both had to focus there because that's what we're educating on. But all that happens, right? And it's absolutely critical, and it's at least co-important, right? Multiple times in this conversation, I've given the caveat for the purpose of education that we're going to speak about a narrow thing, recognizing that other things matter a lot. And that's where things move away from education and towards a real person who is suffering from this. Yeah. That's part of what makes this fun, right? Is getting to know real people and getting to know about them, about their families. And I don't, some of this, the good stuff, right? Their hobbies, when the grandkid graduates from high school, right? That's a lot of the joy, but that's really personal to each patient, right? So you brought up palliative care, early palliative care, day one. In my opinion, ideally with a consulting service, even if the oncologist is truly expert themselves, because having someone who can spend the time separate, who doesn't have to spend 45 minutes talking about the anti-nausea drug and the chemo change and when are we going to use radiation and all that, that takes time to do it right. So having someone else who sits down and knows that in their, however long an appointment is for them, that you're only going to talk about palliative care, that matters. Cancer sucks. Cancer sucks a lot. Everyone in this room knows that. And many of us come to a cancer diagnosis, or my personal case, I'll say, come to being an oncologist with significant depression, right? I have significant depression issues. Much of the world has significant depression issues, and cancer don't make that any better, right? And some people don't have that and then develop that problem as a consequence of cancer cells. Yeah. And so the optimal care of that is highly individual, but in my opinion, every patient who's open to it should be seeing a cancer counselor. These are not folks who sit you down on a couch and talk to you about your mother. They're people who are expert in the crap that is cancer and the crap that cancer patients go through and know the tricks that help other patients with coping with that, right? It's very practically oriented. And then the additional needs are highly variable by patient. I have a pharmacist shoulder to shoulder with me in clinic, a thoracic oncology specialized pharmacist. You can imagine such a luxury. He's amazing. He reviews every patient for drug-drug interactions. He asks patients about what supplementary or alternative meds they're taking and make sure there aren't untoward interactions and educates them on what level of data there is for benefit or harm. When patients have alternative practitioners, I'm open to speaking to that person. That's the topic of another 3-hour seminar, but let's say it's an important part of care for many patients. And then there are all kinds of things that are really unique to the patient and the geography you're in, right? So I grew up in suburban New York. I lived mostly in New England until I moved to Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where I learned that many of my patients live in barns. And apparently not all barns are the same as far as what they offer, right? Running water or not, heat or not, electricity or not, right? And so the barn to me is a great example of you don't know until you ask, and that the needs of an individual are highly individual. And this is the process of getting to know your patient amongst multiple axes and knowing what is it that's most going to help that individual.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much for that. I think some things for me that I really want to make sure that people will take away who are watching tonight are there are options. Novel treatments and trials are happening right now. The drugs, the amazing discovery drugs of tomorrow are available today. So make sure you're having conversations about clinical trials with your healthcare providers. Palliative care, palliative care, palliative care, palliative care. I think we really spent a lot of time on that and drove that home, which is an important piece. Second opinions is one of the things that we did not talk about today. If you are not feeling like you are getting from your healthcare provider what Dr. Weiss has been talking about tonight and how he's been exhibiting, how he spends time and educates, empowers, and ultimately treats his patients. Second opinions are an option, and that's something that we at GoTo can help with also. People
I would
like,
encourage everyone, right? Second opinions are not just if you're not satisfied with your doctors.
Yep.
Because some of the second opinions I see are sent from amazing clinicians.
Yeah.
Right. I'm astounded by their brilliance. How the heck they know lung cancer so well when they also have to know breast cancer, colon cancer, right? As cancers go, actually, lung cancer is a cancer that community docs get right more than other cancers.
yeah,
It's one of the cancers they tend to be better at. It's not about criticizing your doctor or second guessing them. It's about additional options, particularly those trial options that doctor may not have as tools at their disposal.
yeah. I could not agree with you more, and I think we have docs like Dr. Weiss and others who have the benefit of, I think you said it earlier, you get to specialize head and neck and small cell lung cancer. Like those are your areas, right? Whereas if you're a general oncologist in the middle of, I don't want to call it any specific city, but a more rural part of this
I'll call it
country.
out. One of my best friends and is probably the smartest oncologist I know. He practices in Sicklerville, New Jersey, which I assure you is the middle of nowhere other than some proximity to Philadelphia. He is smarter than I am.
Yeah,
He's a really, really, really good doctor. And he regularly refers patients to, usually to Penn, I think. I don't know which hospital he's referring, but to the academic hospitals in the Philadelphia area.
Yeah.
Because they have trials he doesn't, and he knows what they are, and he sends them for them, even though he's friggin' brilliant.
Yeah.
Right? It's a
Yeah.
you can be a brilliant carpenter, but if you happen to not have a hammer in your toolbox, you're going to refer to someone with a hammer.
Yep, agreed.
All right, bad analogy. You'll probably buy a hammer. But
No,
you got what you
that's
get.
okay. I heard you. The wrong hammer, right? It's the wrong hammer in the
It's not
toolbox.
about, it's not just, the most important access is not about being good or better or worse. It's about the specific tools that are available. When all you do all day long is small cell, you're going to have some really good small cell trials.
Yeah.
And you're going to know the nuances of the literature at a greater depth because you're not keeping up on breast cancer and colorectal cancer and what have you. You have the luxury of being able to go to that depth, and that consult can have value even if the patient doesn't go to trial and even if they have the world's best community oncologist.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much for coming and talking with us tonight. It has, as usual, been an absolute pleasure. You've been a wealth of knowledge. The levity that you can bring to a very serious conversation, I know is incredibly important to me. It's incredibly important to the people in the room that are all nodding their heads right now. And
You
I know
gotta laugh or cry, and I saw too many patients today. I'm done with the crying.
Yeah,
It's
I agree.
9:40 at night. We're gonna do some laughing.
That's it. I love it. A huge thank you to Dr. Weiss again, all of you watching live or post live, Penn Media for coming in and setting up this studio here every month so that we can bring this to all of you wherever you may be watching from. Onyx and Ash, James, our very own James Hall, who will go back and edit this and pull little clips out to give little bite-sized pieces of information that might be easier to digest for our community. And of course, the whole GoTo team. I thank Bonnie Dario, my mom, co-founder of GoTo, for being here and sitting here tonight. And then, of course, I have to acknowledge our supporters, because without their support, we wouldn't be able to bring this programming. I'm going to start specifically with some folks who are huge contributors to our small cell lung cancer work, support, and education that we're rolling out through here, Amgen and Genentech, but also through Living Room programming in particular, AstraZeneca, Bayer, Bristol Myers Squibb, Daiichi Sankyo, Eisai, Foundation Medicine, Johnson & Johnson, Merck, Mirati Therapeutics, Novartis, Novocure, Regeneron, Sanofi, and Takeda. I mean, that's a long list, and I say it all the time, but I think it points back to others that also believe how important this programming is. So thank you all. Until next time, please stay happy, safe, healthy, all of the lovely things, and we'll see you next time. Thanks,
Thank
Dr.
you,
Weiss.
Jared.
So I'll be brave if you're brave. I'll be brave, but only